In the winter of 1851 to 52, a young woman named Elizabeth Siddal lay in a bathtub in a cold London studio for hours at a time, fully clothed in a heavy silver-embroidered gown, her copper hair spreading around her in the water. Oil lamps burned beneath the tub to keep her warm. At some point during one of those sessions, the lamps went out. The artist didn't notice. He kept painting. She didn't say a word. By the time she finally climbed out, Elizabeth Siddal had severe pneumonia. Her father threatened to sue. The artist paid £50 in medical bills and went on to exhibit the painting at the Royal Academy the following spring to great acclaim. The painting sold before it was even finished for 300 guineas to an art dealer who had the instinct to buy genius in progress. That painting is Ophelia by John Everett Millais. It now hangs in Tate Britain in London, insured for a minimum of £30 million. It is one of the most reproduced Victorian images in the world, and almost no one who looks at it understands what they are actually seeing. Look at it for a moment. Really look. A young woman floats on her back in a narrow river, surrounded by extravagant, almost claustrophobically dense vegetation. Her pale face is framed by copper hair. Her eyes are open and fixed on the sky. Her mouth is slightly parted. Her arms are spread wide, palms turned upward, in a posture of absolute surrender. The scene seems serene, poetic. A peaceful passage from life. But that reading is the first thing we need to question. The painting encourages the wrong reading. It gives you flowers first and drowning second. Most people assume Ophelia chose this, that this is a deliberate, aesthetically conscious act of ending a life. But Shakespeare never wrote that. In Hamlet, Ophelia fell accidentally when a willow branch broke beneath her. And in her madness, she was, in the playwright's words, incapable of her own distress. She didn't understand what was happening. She sang. She floated. She let the weight of her waterlogged clothes pull her down without resistance, without panic, without a single scream. The first clue is not in her face. It is below the waterline. That gown, an antique silver-embroidered garment Millais bought second-hand for £4, is already half consumed by the water. The upper body still floats. The face and chest are still above the surface, held up by trapped air in the fabric, exactly as Shakespeare described, mermaid-like, a while they bore her up. But below the hips, the dress has drunk its fill. The lower half of Ophelia's body has almost completely disappeared into the dark water beneath her. She is being pulled down, slowly, inevitably. The gown is not a costume, it is a mechanism. Heavy with their drink, as Shakespeare wrote, a slow anchor pulling toward what the playwright called muddy death. The second clue is scattered around her hands. There are daisies floating near her right hand, Ophelia's own symbol of innocence in the play. From the line, "There is a daisy." There are violets garlanded at her neck, which she herself had said, "withered all when my father died." There is forget-me-not along the bank, meadowsweet drifting to her left. In the Victorian language of flowers, meadowsweet meant the absolute futility of grief, the uselessness of everything that came after. There is the weeping willow above her, the symbol of rejected love, mentioned by name in Shakespeare's description of this very scene. Millais was a dedicated fisherman whose grandfather had instilled in him a near fanatical love of rivers. Critics would later say the background of Ophelia was a fly fisherman's dream rendered in paint. Every reed, every reflection, every submerged stone, documented with the precision of a man who had spent his life watching exactly this kind of water. He spent 5 months along the banks of the Hogsmill River in Surrey, working 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, crouched beneath a small umbrella, battling swarms of flies and threatening letters from farmers whose hayfields he had trampled. He painted the landscape first. For 5 months, there was no Ophelia. Only the river, the flowers, the bank. And in the middle of it all, a white space shaped like a body-shaped absence, waiting. The painting becomes more dangerous when you stop looking at Ophelia and start looking at what floats around her. Not all of those flowers are from Shakespeare. And this is where the investigation changes direction. The red poppies scattered across the water are not in the play. Nowhere in Hamlet does Gertrude mention poppies in her account of Ophelia's end. Millais added them himself. That detail matters because Millais was not careless with flowers. He documented every other bloom in letters to his friend Thomas Combe, the price of the dress, the behavior of specific insects, the names of plants at exact positions in the frame. The poppies appear in the finished painting without explanation. In Victorian flower language, the poppy already carried the language of sleep and death. That alone would have been enough. But after Elizabeth Siddal's life ended, the flower took on a second meaning no one in 1852 could have fully controlled. Laudanum, the opium tincture that killed her, begins with the poppy. The flowers around her were not the drug that killed her, but they belonged to the same symbolic family. Poppy, opium, sleep, death. And after 1862, that connection became impossible to unsee. To understand how that happened, we need to follow a chain of events that begins on the floor of that London studio. When Millais needed a model to pose for the figure of Ophelia, he chose Elizabeth Siddal, a milliner's assistant in her early 20s with copper hair, pale skin, and an unusual height that gave pre-Raphaelite paintings their characteristic elongation. She was already sitting for other Brotherhood artists. She agreed to pose for Millais in his Gower Street studio in the winter of 1851–52. The agreement was that she would lie in a heated bath and he would paint from life, exactly the kind of radical naturalism the Brotherhood had sworn itself to. Truth to nature, no studio conventions, no borrowed gestures from Renaissance masters. Everything from the living body. Millais had already spent 5 months painting every leaf, every reed, and every reflection in the Surrey riverbank with microscopic care. What he needed now was not a costumed figure, but something more specific. The actual physics of a body in water. The way cloth spreads and then grows heavy. The exact angle of a submerged figure in the moment before the surface claims it. He needed someone to be in the water. And the person who agreed to be in the water was not protected by it. She was consumed by it. When the lamps went out and the bath turned cold, Siddal continued to lie there without complaint. She later said she did not want to disrupt his concentration. This is the detail I find most revealing. Not the accident itself, but the fact that she absorbed it in silence. The painting required her suffering, and she offered it without being asked twice. She recovered from the pneumonia only partially. A doctor prescribed laudanum, the standard treatment of the era, available without restriction at any pharmacy in Britain, used for everything from coughs to grief. It helped, and it helped enough that she kept needing it. The dependency built slowly over the following years, through the loss of a stillborn child, through a deepening depression, through the particular suffering of a woman of genuine artistic talent in an era that preferred her as subject matter rather than creator. In February 1862, Siddal was found unconscious after taking laudanum. By the morning of February 11th, she was dead. She was 32. The poppies Millais painted around her, the ones Shakespeare never wrote, the ones Millais never explained, were the beginning of the same symbolic chain that ended her life. The drug that killed her came from the flower he chose to scatter in the water. Millet left documents for almost everything, but not for this. To the art world of 1852, none of this mattered yet. What mattered was paint. Ruskin saw botanical truth.
The Times saw a weedy ditch and condemned the strange perversity of an imagination that would deny a dying woman any pathos. The Morning Chronicle saw genius on the verge of something unprecedented. But all three were arguing about technique. None of them were talking about the body that had made the paint possible. The painting sold. Millet was made an associate of the Royal Academy the following year. Meanwhile, the woman who had provided the physics of drowning was recovering in stages she would never fully complete. There is something else in this painting, something that requires a different kind of attention. Some viewers, scanning the dense foliage along the right bank, see something that is not a flower and not a branch. In the interplay of light and shadow in that vegetation, the shapes seem to resolve, briefly, depending on how your eye moves, into the suggestion of a human skull. I want to be careful here. There is no surviving note from Millet proving that he hit it. It may be pareidolia, the brain doing what brains do, finding faces in clouds, finding skulls in leaves. The academic literature on this specific detail is thin, and I won't pretend otherwise. But consider what the painting has already trained you to do by the time your eye reaches that section of the canvas. It has shown you flowers that mean grief, futility, rejected love, and death. It has shown you a dress that functions as a weapon. It has positioned a small red-breasted robin in the upper left corner, a bird whose Victorian meaning was the departing soul, the creature said to accompany the spirit out of one world and into the next. By the time you reach those shadows on the right bank, your eye is already searching for death in everything. And so the painting does what Millet may or may not have intended. It trains you to look for endings, and then suddenly endings appear where they may not even exist. It does not reveal itself all at once. It waits for your eye to become suspicious. That, in a way, is the most honest description of what Ophelia does as a painting. It makes you complicit in finding darkness, and the darkness finds you back. Elaine Showalter, writing about this image in the 1980s, described Ophelia as the defining visual emblem of a specific Victorian assumption, that female collapse is beautiful, that a woman most fully belongs to the world of art at the moment she stops belonging to the world of the living. The pose, arms wide, palms up, eyes skyward, is lifted directly from religious painting of the pre-Renaissance period, the classic posture of a Christian martyr in the moment of holy ecstasy. Millet gave a drowning madwoman the body language of a saint, and the Victorian public, alternately scandalized and transfixed, couldn't quite decide whether that was blasphemy or revelation. Contemporary researchers like Jan Marsh and Lucinda Hawksley have argued, persuasively I think, that it is no longer possible to look at this painting as simply a triumph of Victorian realism. The painting cannot be separated from the body that made it possible. Without Elizabeth Siddal lying in that cold water, the figure in this canvas would be a costume sketch propped against a studio wall. The specific quality of the floating, the way the fabric spreads, the angle of the submerged hips, the exact distribution of weight between surface and depth, all of that came from a real woman in real cold water, absorbing the cold in silence. The story does not end with the painting. It gets darker. After Siddle's passing, her husband, the painter Dante Gabriel Rossetti, buried with her the only manuscript of his collected poems, in a gesture he would come to regret. 7 years later, in 1869, he wanted the poems back. And so, in the middle of the night, in Highgate Cemetery, a man named Charles Augustus Howell, a known confidence artist and Rossetti's agent, organized and carried out the exhumation of Siddle's grave. The coffin was opened by firelight. The manuscript was retrieved, soaked through, and Howell, in what can only be described as a final act of grotesque myth-making, spread a rumor through London that Siddle's copper hair had continued growing after her burial, that when they opened the coffin, her hair had filled it entirely. It wasn't true, but it became part of the legend, and the legend is inseparable from the painting now. The model for the most famous image of a drowning woman in Western art had her grave opened at night, 7 years after her burial, so that a man could retrieve his poems. The cult of Siddle as Ophelia, sustained first by pre-Raphaelite obsession, then by fin de siècle aestheticism, then by successive waves of feminist reappraisal, transformed her into something between a ghost story and a patron saint. The image absorbed her entirely. The image outlived her by more than a century and a half. The painting hangs today in room 14 of Tate Britain. It leads postcard sales by a significant margin every year. It has been cited directly by Lars von Trier, by Nick Cave, by Laurence Olivier's film production of Hamlet. It has caused strangers to weep when they found it on loan to another country and not where they expected it to be. It has trained an entirely new generation's visual grammar for what a beautiful ending looks like. What it does not do, what it has never done, is tell you the full story of how it was made. This is the connection that makes the poppies hard to treat as decoration. Shakespeare gave Ophelia willows and crowflowers, nettles and daisies, long purples. He gave her violets, which, she says, withered when her father died. He did not give her poppies. Millet gave her poppies, and the substance derived from those flowers became the instrument of her model's death. Whether Millet understood, on some level, what he was painting into that water, whether the choice was conscious, instinctive, or simply the visual logic of a young man obsessed with botanical completeness, is something we cannot determine from the surviving record. He left us his diaries. He left us his letters. He left us the meticulous account of every external fact of this painting's creation. And he left us silence on exactly the things that matter most. So I want to leave you with one question. When Millet painted those poppies around Ophelia, did he choose a symbol of death, or did he accidentally paint the future of the woman in the bath?